Hello everyone and welcome to a wonderful game from round 3 of the FIDE Grand Prix currently being played in Belgrade, Serbia. It's Pentala, Harikrishna versus Anish, Giri, and a lot of you guys have requested this game even before it finished and for good reason. So let's dive straight into it and see what happened here. Harikrishna has the white pieces and he opens with e4. We have e5 by Anish, knight to f3, knight to c6 and bishop to b5. Pentala goes for the Rui Lopez. We have a6 challenging the bishop to a4 being the Morphy's defense, and now knight to f6. We have castles offering the pawn on e4, but this is a well-known theory, so Anish captures it, and now d4. You might think, but why not rook to e1? This clearly makes sense. Well, you could play that. It's nothing serious. Black will play knight to c5, go after the bishop here, and after bishop captures, d captures on c6, knight captures on e5. We can play knight to e6, preventing any nasty discoveries, and after, let's say, queen to h5, going after checkmate, we can play queen to f6, and everything is perfectly fine. So this is one way to do it, but a more modern way is to just advance the pawn to d4. We have b5 attacking the bishop to b3, and now d5. So black will give back the e5 pawn. D captures on e5, and now bishop to e6. So this is very solid for black. Knight b to d2, and now knight to c5, challenging the bishop on b3, avoiding the trade here for the knight. And here we have c3. White says rather, you can capture the bishop here, but then my queen can capture, or otherwise I might just put my bishop on c2 and grab hold of this long diagonal. So bishop to e7, Anish just continues development, bishop to c2, and now black strikes in the center with d4. So knight to b3, putting more pressure on d4, and here we have d3. So it might seem strange to allow something like this, but this is all very standard theory. So bishop back to b1, now comes knight captures on b3, a captures on b3, and now bishop to f5, defending the passed pawn on d3. So bishop to e3, continuing development, and now Anish castles. We have bishop to d4, discontinuing the defense of the d3 pawn, so now white is ready to capture on d3, and here Anish just plays queen to d5, saying, okay, you are welcome to capture on d3, but I'm going to capture on b3. For example, bishop captures here, we're going to have bishop captures, queen captures, and queen captures on b3, with black being more than happy with this position. So instead, after queen to d5, we have rook to e1, just adding more defenders to the e5 pawn, also developing the rook. And now there are a couple of games that reach this exact same position. One of the more popular ideas is just pushing the pawn to d2, and after queen captures, then we're going to play bishop captures on b1, rook captures, and then we're going to capture on b3. So this has been played. However, alongside a couple of other ideas that were played, Anish plays a move that has never been played before, and that of course is pawn to b4. And now you see that he is trying to undermine the bishop on d4, and what can white do here? Well, you could just ignore this, but you could also just start capturing. So here we have bishop captures on d3, bishop captures on d3, queen captures, and now b captures on c3. We have b captures on c3, and now queen captures on b3. So the material on the board is even, but it's a very interesting position, as black already has a passed a pawn. So white should have something in return for that. And here you could continue with something like rook e to b1, try and harass the queen, then the queen goes to e6, and so on. But if you don't do this, you can advance the pawn to e6 right away, because if rook e to b1, then queen to e6 will block the pawn, and Harikrishna really wants to advance this pawn, not only to open up the position, but also the bishop now gets hold of this diagonal, targeting that g7 pawn. So here f captures on e6. For the moment, the pawn is defended, so it's not a problem. Now queen to e2, getting ready to pick up the pawn, and here we have a5. Anish starts advancing his passed pawn, and now the thing is, for example, if queen captures, rook captures, here we're going to play bishop to d6, and it's not something white really wants to play. I mean, it's black who has the passed a pawn, so nothing really to show for here. So instead, after a4, we have this incredible c4 move, and this is where the game gets really interesting, and most likely why so many of you have requested it. Here, Anish can play a variety of moves. One move is knight captures on d4. We're going to discuss this one. Rook captures on f3 is another one, also very interesting. But the move Anish plays is, of course, the most interesting. So here, if knight captures on d4, we're just going to play knight captures, attack the queen, and after the queen moves, attacks the knight, we'll probably see a capture on e6 and attacking the rook, and now rook f7. We get this position where both players are fairly happy with their position. All in all, it's nothing really too dangerous for black, and it's still black who has the passed a pawn. Another thing, instead of knight captures on d4, we could also play rook captures on f3. That's also a possibility. Now we're going to play queen captures on e6 with check, and now rook can go back, rook to f7, if you don't want to capture the rook and allow knight captures on d4. So we would probably see this, and then queen captures on c6. Also a pretty crazy position, but acceptable for both white and black. However, after c4, Anish doesn't play knight captures on d4 or rook captures on f3. Anish plays queen captures on f3, and that's the good stuff. This is why so many of you have suggested this. And now the question is, what do you play here? Of course, now capturing with the queen is out of the question, as the rook guards the queen. So here we have to capture with the g pawn. Or rather, you could try this even. Queen captures, rook captures, but then after g captures on f3, knight captures on d4, and the bishop and the knight against the rook, it's just much better for black. Again, it's only black who has the passed a pawn, so this would be very one-sided. So instead, after this queen captures on f3, we have g captures on f3, and now knight captures on d4. So grabbing two pieces for the queen. Here you can see that now the bishop and knight will try and fight against the white queen, and also it's very nice that the knight is guarding the e6 pawn, so you don't have to worry about losing that right away. So queen to e4, putting pressure on the knight, and now knight captures on f3. With check, we're gonna win even more material. So king to h1. Yeah, you do not want to play king to f1. This is something that might happen to you in blitz, and then you run into knight to d2, a nice royal fork. So instead, king to h1, and now knight captures on e1. So before capturing, we want to get rid of this pawn. Queen captures on e6, rook to f7, blocking check, and also adding a defender to the bishop on e7. And now rook captures on e1. And now if you look at the position, Anish has a rook and the bishop for a queen, plus the passed a pawn. So if white doesn't do something very quickly, that passed pawn is going to start marching forward. So here we have rook to f8. Anish abandons the idea of pushing the pawn, and now he's going after the f2 pawn. So what can white do here? He plays rook to d1. He wants to bring the rook to d7 and then put pressure on black's position. So here, king to h8. Now we first have to unpin if we want to start wreaking havoc along the f file. And now rook to d7, going after the bishop here. And here we have rook captures on f2. It's hard to get out of this pin. You can't really move the bishop, otherwise you're just gonna lose the game. So here, rook captures on f2 is pretty much the only move. We have queen captures on e7, now threatening checkmate on g7, and now rook to f1 with check. We have king to g2, and now rook 1 to f2 with check. King g1, we have rook to f1 with check, king to g2, and rook 1 to f2 with check. Here, king g1 was played, and it was in this position on move 35 that the players agreed to a draw, or rather, it was a draw by threefold repetition. So a very nice positional queen sacrifice by Anish, who extends his lead in the FIDE Grand Prix, so very nicely done. And you can't push this or anything with white, even though you have a queen. For example, if you just continue with, let's say, rook f1, king g2, and now even if black tries something, king to g3, rook f3 check, king g4, rook f4 check, you can always play king to g5. And now after h6 with check, you can play king to h5, and now what do you play here? We're gonna play rook to g1. Of course, we have to defend against checkmate, but now rook captures on c7. So it doesn't seem like anything great is happening here. You can even give up the queen here. It's not a problem. Rook g5 check, captures. We're gonna play king captures on g5, and now let's say rook to f6, defending our rook. Rook to a7, going after this pawn. We're gonna play rook to c6, going after this pawn, and now a nice trade here. Captures, and of course this is now a draw. by just looking at it. I mean, everyone knows that this is a draw. So, of course, after king to g1, there's not much to play for. The players agree to a draw. But what a great theoretical struggle, and what a wonderful choice of, after achieving this brand new position with a move like b4, to even getting such a move to sacrifice the queen. And it's okay. You of course have winning chances, but a draw is more than enough for Anish to solidify his lead in the FIDE Grand Prix. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any other favorites, do use hashtag suggestion and I will go over them. I would like to thank Ukraine for defending Europe, 4 stars PTN, Gregory Boschko, Ron McGovern, and Tomasz Turner for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE Grand Prix until it ends. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.